Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, this weekend, I went for my first round of golf of the year. I only started golfing last year, so I am still relatively, new to the sport. But I've woken up today feeling a little sore. Golf, I think I've discovered, uses some of those unique muscle groups you might not use in anything else. Even if you're going to the gym and you're bench pressing, you're squatting or something like that, just some of those smaller muscles for that refined control. So, I don't care about the score because I knew I was always going to be bad. But I'm feeling, for anyone who thinks golf isn't a physical game, carrying a bag for 18 holes, I'm a little rough.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. When I used to go on quite a few golf weekends with my friends, and I would always play really well round one, and then the round two, my back was sore, my hip was sore, and I felt like I was basically acting like a 75-year-old ready to put his feet up and never play the sport again after just one round of 18 holes. I talked to one of our colleagues, John, I think he might be this weekend, who's actually playing in like 90 holes in 5 days or something crazy. So that's something that I could never fathom doing. And obviously, if you go to different countries, there's different etiquette around playing golf. So in the States, it's really common. And in where I was on the Gold Coast, there's a lot of resort courses. And you drive around golf buggies all the time. That if you're walking around sore after 18 holes of golf, driving a golf buggy for that 6 or 7 kilometers, then you probably need to do some training or get more active, I would say. But for carrying around a bag on your back for that stretch of time, it does really creep up on you. So unfortunately, lifting massive weights at the gym doesn't sort out the functional stuff that you need as much as people might tell you. I've definitely learned that the hard way.
Well, the funny thing is my father-in-law joined, and it was two of my mates down here. So they're about my age, in their early 30s. They're amateur golfers, right? But they're not bad either. But my father-in-law, coming up, he's got to be near 65 years old, still went and beat the two young bulls. They're trying to, hit everything, and, they get a couple good down the fairway, but something about just nice, slow, steady swing, just going to put it straight in the fairway every time, just walked away the winner.
Yep. Well, I used to work at a golf course, and there was most of the members were older, so it was quite a nice resort course, and there was a residential area, so people would drive their golf carts up and play, and most of them were 65 plus, etc. And they would just hit the ball down the middle and just go drive straight up to the ball and hit it again up the middle, and always be good for a solid bogey every single time, and get a couple pars on the way, never get themselves in trouble, and off you go. The thing is, when you're younger, you can hit it further. But what happens when you hit things further? You have more margin for error. Things can go wrong just as much as it can go right, particularly with spin and so forth. So those people that have nice little slow swings and just hit the ball down the middle of the fairway, I'm actually envious of them. I'm trying to get some lessons. And I was like, I just want to hit balls like that. I'm happy to lose 20, 30 yards off my hit. If you can just maybe hit straight out. No, this day... Yeah. You got to swing faster, swing harder. And ever since then, my margin of error has gotten worse and worse and worse. So if I play a golf course with lots of trees, I'm absolutely screwed. If I play a course that's quite open, it doesn't have many well-matured trees along the side of the fairway, then I've got a good chance of actually shooting a decent score, because I'm seem to have a really good correlation between hitting on the other fairway and hitting it back over onto the green for a nice par or a birdie, rather than doing it straight down the middle, which is not the optimal way. And I've copped a lot of grief over time because of it.
Yeah, well, I'll keep you updated how the summer goes, but
please.
My general goal is to leave the golf course with as many balls as I started with. So I don't tend to lose a lot of golf balls, but
that's good.
When I do, I usually at least find one or two in the trees when I go out searching for it.
Yeah, well, hey, that's a good scorecard if you can come back with as many as you started with. I remember playing a golf course once down in, I think, South London, and they have really long rough, but a couple of times a year they'll cut the rough short, and we happened to time that like the day after they cut the rough, and the rough goes from being a foot thick to basically being a couple inches. And there were hundreds of golf balls we found along the way that we were just mopping up along the way as we finished our round. We ended up with each of us 30, 40 balls each extra. That were well, some of them weren't very good, but we're like, hey, we'll take what we can get. So that was as profitable a round as I have played in many, many years. So if you're really smart and you're really saving some money, go find out from the golf courses in your area when they're cutting their rough, and maybe you'll profit on some extra golf balls.
It's a great idea, Nick. I'm going to have to think about that. But Nick, moving on to business, it was a busy couple of weeks since the last time you and I have done a bit of a news wrap episode, and some of these are ongoing stories, which, I've mentioned before. It is a nice sort of thing, Nick, that we've been doing this for so long now that there's this continuous stream of news stories as they come along. And I think perhaps the biggest one is we're finally getting more concrete information about the launch of ESPN's direct-to-consumer streaming service. It feels like we've been talking about this for some time. There were some curveballs in there with venue sports and other things, but we finally have, fall of 2025. There's prices around it. There's the select plan, which is $11.99 a month, which is for ESPN plus content. So I think it kind of keeps the status quo. But the new announcement for the unlimited plan is, $30 a month or $300 for the year, which includes all of ESPN's linear channels on ESPN and ABC. There's different features being added in there. They're going to talk about how to try to monetize things through e-commerce, their ESPN Bet Sportsbook. The one I'm personally really interested about, Nick, because I've always talked about this, is they've also talked about an AI personalized SportsCenter. Growing up, SportsCenter was a great thing. You woke up in the morning, I probably watched it 2-3 times, even though it's the same highlights, before everybody got into big debatey, yelly shows and just to be highlights. So I'm very interested about this personalized SportsCenter. But, Nick, ESPN is a leader in the space. When they make moves, other, things tend to follow. So now that we're finally getting more and more details confirmed, sort of what's your take on this latest round of announcements that we have?
Well, it's good to see that it's finally here, because by far ESPN has the best array of rights in going globally for a sports broadcast, a sports platform, and finally being able to see this all come to life in one single destination is a really exciting proposition. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. I'm intrigued to see how things like the ESPN Bet integration works, because that's been something that we've seen a number of other major platforms try and failed, basically, with. If you think about Fubo TV, you think about, I don't know that they would say it's a failure, but I've not heard anything really coming out of DAZN around their DAZN Bet proposition. And in fact, ultimately the idea that a broadcaster or a platform can create a better fan betting experience than some of the major incumbents who have been doing it for such a long time is quite a bold shout. But to see if that can actually be something that really does move the bottom line for them will be interesting to see. And just to see how big the uptake is. Obviously, this is the transition play for their cable business. Now they've finally got themselves ready to do so. I'm just intrigued to see how strong the adoption really is. I feel like it's well priced. It's pretty good value if you're a sports fan. Like, how could you not consider it if you're a cord cutter? So it's difficult to think of any reason why people would walk away from, say, accepting and adopting this subscription proposition versus all the other places that you might go for your sports rights. The other bit of it all is really what happens with ESPN Plus as it currently stands today, because ESPN Plus has been a product they've had in the market for quite a long time, had some pretty major sets of rights and some pretty lower tier rights available in that Plus product. But really, the Plus product wasn't a Plus product. It was more of a niche product. It was probably closer to their Deportes offering than it was, the T1 sports rights. And they brought those worlds closer together when they put more UFC content on there, PGA Tour stuff. And that's probably a bit of a knock on them to say it was a bit more like the Deportes thing. But I think you know what I mean. There was a wider array of rights that perhaps aren't the big ticket ones as part of it, more than just having the big tickets alone. Just what happens with that? Is it just part of this select plan? And then, okay, then that's just going to be just not really worthwhile having. And I could see it disappearing in a year or two. They just probably don't want to. They have to have something to facilitate that Plus group for a while before they want to just turn the crank up the price 3 times what it is today, and then see what happens with those subscribers. So, yeah, I'd imagine the ESPN Plus product will probably disappear over time. I can't imagine why it would stay in, at least in its current construct. So, yeah, it's about time. That's all. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's not necessarily saying the niche sports things like that. It's more just like a real estate thing, right? Like if there's a linear channel, there's only so many things you can choose to program on there. And yes, there's ESPN, there's ESPN2 and a couple side channels, but American sports are on a Saturday in the fall. You could have the PGA Tour, you could have college football, you could have all kinds of things on there. I think it's as much about just having a place to distribute it when you have so much content as opposed to necessarily saying it's a tier 1 or a tier 2.
Well, I'm just really intrigued to see if ESPN becomes that premier destination where I could see a world where you're talking to top tier fans, and that's not the only app they go to, but
Yeah.
it could be the only app they go to in some instances where they just put ESPN on, watch whatever's going on the linear channels that they offer, and if they want to go deeper, they will have those available as well. So I'm intrigued to see if it can be that. They've got enough breadth there to be this single destination that people are hoping for, but it's a really competitive market with pretty major rights at their competitors as well. So I just wonder. I really hope it's successful because it will give a lot of buoyancy back to the streaming market in terms of investing in rights, I think. But if it goes with it fizzles out a little bit and doesn't really bridge the gap that they're probably looking for between the current cable revenues and where the trends are going, it could really put ESPN under a lot of pressure for the next media rights cycles coming up.
Well, you mentioned earlier just sort of what's going to happen to ESPN Plus and that lower tier price point going from $11.99 to basically tripling to $30 a month. I think it is worth mentioning that $30 a month also includes a bundle with Disney Plus and with Hulu. So it's not necessarily that it's going to be exclusively just the sports content. And, Disney Plus, since its launch, a few years back, has absolutely been massive. It's not just, the kids' cartoons anymore. I believe they actually bought some stuff from Fox, who we'll talk about next, and some of their original content, where, it's got the whole Marvel Studios, all of Star Wars, lots of content on there. So it almost feels like still, even for $30 a month, if I was in America where I could actually get this package and I can get all of ESPN and I could get all the stuff that sits within the Disney Plus and Hulu, like $30 still to me feels like a good deal. Now, the caveat is that's for the first year. I don't know what the price is going to jump up to the second year, but that does feel like a pretty good deal for all the content that's in there.
Oh, yeah. When you map it out like that, there is so much value in there. And Disney, I think from memory, Disney Plus is right up there globally as one of the leading subscription-based platforms in terms of number of subscribers, although they've taken a few different ways to get to those numbers. The price point is a bargain, really, for that value. The issue that I have, or what I'm intrigued to see, is we're so focused on price around these types of bundles and these types of subscription products rather than the value that all comes together. So I'll be interested to see how they market this once ESPN's live. How heavily are they pushing just the ESPN as the primary messaging? How much of it's Disney Plus and just this bundle full access? You get the best of the sports and entertainment all together in one place, and how that experience comes to life. How seamless basically it'll be jumping from platform to platform. Because I can't imagine you would have a Disney Plus button in ESPN, for example, and vice versa. So I'm intrigued to see how all they can approach that and to make sure they don't have too much friction involved in moving subscribers from place to place, because like you said, the value is definitely there.
And for some of those other additional services, like you mentioned, the betting, the e-commerce, the AI featured SportsCenter, how much do those things really matter? How much of them do you think are just a little bit, they're nice talking points, or do you think that this is going to be something? Because you and I think one of the things we talk about is the lean in versus lean back experience. So are you anticipating this is going to massively change people's consumption habits, or do you think, just put a thought out there, Nick? Is it really going to be needle moving?
No, I can't imagine it will be. I think they'll make a really nice. They've waited a long time to get this platform up and running, right? They haven't been a fast mover in launching this. They've been patient, probably because of the economics around the cable bundle now. Now that they are really declining, now's the time to launch this product. I think the primary focus will be just a really seamless lean back experience, particularly on connected TV and devices like that. For the app in your hand, I do think they want to make sure that is really all synced up. So the betting part works really seamlessly without being able to watch live in the app if possible, to make sure they can bring those worlds as close together, because that is their USP versus all the other major betting sites. I still think it's a really tough challenge to turn that betting part of the business into something really profitable and sustainable, because you might generate some pretty decent revenue maybe from it, but that is, you're only getting a percentage of the turnover there based on people losing money on that proposition. And I just think that's going to be incremental at best. I think there's different studies that have shown that betting integration might be around 10%. I think I saw a number somewhere along the line, or that was actually, I think, better people who are betting and streaming sports. And I just don't think you're going to massively bring people closer to the middle of that. Maybe marginally, but I think they're playing. I would just like to see them forget that and just focus on a really good streaming product with some of those other features like AI highlights and those types of other things that can really bring the platform to life, versus other, I don't want to say gimmicks, but like other fan engagement tools. They might have some incremental value at the time, but I don't think they're not going to be the things that are the reason I'm subscribing to this platform now.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it there. Now, you talked about ESPN not being a fast mover. Someone who's definitely not been a fast mover in this space has been Fox Sports, who, for the most part, has sort of laid low and kind of let the market do its thing. But they've now come out. Now, they've not released the same amount of detail ESPN has, but they've at least said that their new Fox One direct to DTC, and we'll have a conversation about names here in a second, Nick. But they're going to launch their streaming service, and it will be out in time for the NFL season, which is Fox Sports' sort of crown jewel of their rights package. But Fox Sports was someone that was a part of the venue sports, and that didn't go ahead given the news with Fubo and the injunction and all that story that we covered in the past. But now Fox is finally going to go and enter the streaming wars with everyone else. So Nick, talking about fast movers or slow movers, Fox has definitely been on the more patient side of things. I mentioned before, and based on the article, I think they sold their studios to some of the other streaming services as part of Disney Plus for $71 billion. So even though they've not launched their own streaming platform, they have been in the background using their content to get in other streaming platforms. But now's the time they're going to go and launch their own D2C service, particularly from a sports perspective. So, talking about being first to market, learning from others, however you want to look at it from that perspective. What do you take, Nick, on Fox Sports finally jumping into the streaming wars?
Well, Fox is going live with this. Not just Fox Sports alone, but this will be their crown jewel within that asset is the ability to watch their live sports product. No doubt. Also, Fox News and alike will be available on there, which is pretty synonymous with being a place that a lot of people, a different type of audience, loves to consume content in the States. So, no doubt they're targeting a group there that this will appeal to. Obviously, they've been very comfortable waiting, and I think if you were to reflect on how everyone's approached the market, you'd have to put Fox right up there with being best in class in being patient, because so many people have lost so much money along the way. But the question is, can they grab market share now that they have been patient? Others have lost billions to get going, but when they're now trying to come into a market with what Peacock has done and achieved and scaled up in terms of its rights and all the other ESPNs and all the others that exist in the market, can they grab market share from some of those? There will be definitely a core Fox audience that will sign up to something like this, but they've been very happy to wait for this while the cable bundle's been delivering huge carriage fees. And no doubt, because they haven't pulled a trigger on some of these things, they've been able to keep those premiums at a really high level, whilst others have probably found it difficult because they've been creating competitors for that very content. So I think you have to commend Fox's patience before jumping into this space. It'd be interesting to know if they would have ever really launched this product with the venue sports, if buts and whens of when that was potentially coming to market. But they may have talked about it, but I didn't hear about that being a definitive move they were going to make. But it just aligns very much with what ESPN's doing, and Fox are doing the same. Carriage, the cable bundles going down, those guaranteed revenues are dipping, so they have to fill that void, and this is a natural step for them.
Well, I just want to go back to the name, Nick, just for fun. So
sure.
ESPN just went at ESPN Plus. The new streaming ESPN they've announced is just going to be called ESPN. I think there's some time. It's just going to be ESPN. And then I saw last week that Max is now going back to HBO Max, because apparently, yeah. And now, Fox Sports, it's just going to be Fox Sports, one D2C. I mean, I don't know if it'll have a different name, but just for fun, Nick, we're Sports Pro. We did Sports Pro Plus, like what's in a name, Nick? Sometimes with these streaming services, it's Max, it's Plus, just what are your thoughts? What's all in the name?
What's all in a name? Good. That's a really good question. I'd say that there's something in keeping your name as it was, I think, from an IP perspective, and that's exactly what ESPN's trying to do. They're just staying with, hey, this is the single destination, the flagship of ESPN. So go download the ESPN app, and you look at all the other platforms that exist from like Facebook's perspective and Twitter and X, I need to call that TikTok, etc. They just call it one single destination. It's all wrapped together, an optimized experience, and that makes a load of sense. All these other names, I mean, I gave up a long time following Warner Brothers Discovery's approach with some of these name changes and things that they've done. They obviously do not value IP at all when it comes to channels and brand. The jury will be out whether this approach is basically the right one for them to take. But I can't get my head around how they haven't thought about that before they've launched these new brands. And then you've got to go sell that to markets who don't care about the story behind it all. They just know a brand. They kind of know what it does on its on the tin. And I think that they'll just lose. They'll have to be losing people along the way. But they've been so focused on getting efficient, cutting down their debts, and these types of moves obviously have helped this for some reason, but I can't work it out at all. I do think it was the right decision in some instances with like TNT Sports or not being BT Sport anymore because of the BT relationship and taking those rights on. It wouldn't make much sense for that. But to jump between Max and a HBO Max and then a TNT, you start losing people. And I even think with Fox One. I mean, Fox One sounds great, rolls off the tongue, but there's also Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2. Yeah. And I think it just gets a little bit clunky when you start getting too crafty with names. So good luck to them all. And if anyone is some sort of brand expert can tell us which is the right way to do it, I'm all ears. And who knows? Maybe we'll rebrand our Plus membership product to Super Plus or something soon. Yeah. Who knows? Or Squared.
StreamTime 1. I like that. So next story, Nick, moving on, is YouTube. And they have now won the rights to stream a week 1 game, the Brazil game. And this will not be a part of the NFL YouTube package. Won't be on YouTube TV. This is a true, genuine live streaming of the game on YouTube's main channel. And it is a global deal. It's going to be week 1, and it's going to be the LA Chargers versus Kansas City Chiefs. So a good rivalry game, AFC West opponents. So, it's a good matchup. But Nick, what I suppose is interesting from this is anyone that's listened to the StreamTime podcast for it, they know that we are big fans of what YouTube is doing. We are aware that they almost have taken a different geographical approach depending on where they are. Rob Pilgrim talked about, YouTube TV. They don't see that coming over to Europe because of, any different sorts of types of factors, and they're going to rely more on things like Prime channels. But YouTube does seemingly doing more and more of this. What are your takeaways from having this game and what it means in particular doing it from YouTube's main sort of, destination as opposed to being on one of their more select or bespoke packages?
Yeah, I was really interested to see this because it is taking a different approach, as you said. It's going for the traditional YouTube approach. It's going to try to drive engagement and then revenue through a traditional, more or less traditional means, which is advertising and advertising alone. Now, there will be other ways to amplify that and drive, perhaps in the US, marketing towards their Sunday ticket proposition so they can try and market people from that platform, from the live game to their premium product. But it's a global deal, right? So they're going to be driving advertising revenue across the world for these rights. And, the suggestion is, and reports are, that they're probably going to be, this deal is probably worth well over $100 million for one game. Let's keep that in perspective. Now that's benchmarked off where Peacock spent similar for a premium Sunday game last year, the year before, I think it was. So this is a global deal, whereas that one was only US centered. So they've got to do a lot of work to do to try and drive the returns on that. But if anyone can maximize the value of streaming globally, it is YouTube. So I hope they share the numbers of how this performs in the future. That will be a huge litmus test. And no doubt they will share it if it's really successful for them. To what extent is always up for question, because if they share too much, then it makes it difficult for them to negotiate down the line if it's a big success. But the question is, can a match like this really generate that sort of level of income if it's streamed at a global scale. And the final bit I'm really intrigued to see is how they bring the creator side into it for two reasons. One, it's in Brazil. We've seen Kaze TV success. We've covered it on the pod, which is being basically built on leveraging YouTube as a platform for reach and advertising and sponsored content. And that approach exists in Brazil. It's somewhat coincidental that it's in Brazil. I don't know if that's how much that's going to mean that Brazil will be, say, the number 2 audience outside the US as a result of that. It might be the case, but can they really drive those returns for a premium product through basic advertising alone? Because we haven't seen much of that, definitely from the likes of YouTube, and indeed for premium sports rights like the NFL, generally outside of your traditional players like Fox and ABC. So I really hope it works, because it could be opening the floodgates for more people to look towards YouTube as a destination to do global deals, and also people knocking on YouTube's door to try to do more media rights deals inevitably if this works as well. So exciting to see if this plays out as well as they hope.
Well, I almost want to go a little bit deeper on that, Nick. Let's put on our rose-tinted glasses and let's say it is a success. Because
I wish I had rose-tinted glasses because of my eye here at the moment. That would have been a nice look for me.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Nick? Fortunately, most people are going to consume this via podcast, and you look as beautiful as ever, so you don't have to worry about it. But let's...
Thank you.
Like I said, we've got these rose-tinted glasses on. Let's say this goes as successfully as it could do. We've just talked about Fox and ESPN. Those are going to be your subscription-based services. And, we've had our friends on at Transmit talking about the future of advertising. Say this goes really well. Obviously, things aren't just going to shift overnight. There's long-term deals in play. Like, it's not like one game is going to be a large enough case study to just overturn the whole model. But say it goes as well as YouTube hopes. How could that start to fundamentally change the dynamic of what we've seen? I even think here in the UK, when people are just crying and complaining, and understandably so, having to subscribe to Sky Sports, TNT Sports, Amazon to get only 48% of live games and pay £100 for it. What could it mean if this goes as well as, YouTube might hope?
This might be too dramatic, but I do think it could completely change the game, because we've said for a long time, the whole industry, I think, is really aware of this. The challenge with the economics of sports today is that it's been funded for the last 10, 20 years on pay TV platforms, paying premiums to get live sports behind a paywall and forcing people to subscribe to those platforms. But if you democratize access, which YouTube is the best in the world at doing, and are able to maximize that to the value of which you can drive enough return on advertising dollars through their channels and through their different avenues and means. And they will probably find other ways to do special partnerships around the live event experience to drive even further premiums out of advertising partners. And that works, and it's pretty close to even just break even for them. That would be transformative for the industry if they share that insight, or at least transformative for someone like YouTube. Say, hey, we can grab even more market share, and it's not going to cost us not be a massive loss leader. That is really, really significant if that's going to happen, and would, I think, get the whole industry much more excited, probably more excited like I am already today about the role that advertising can play in enabling that if we can drive more premiums out of sport. There is this tension, or this still huge gap between the programmatic world of really a race to the bottom of premium CPMs and ad clicks and so forth to drive revenues through the automated approach, and this very one-to-one world of advertising that still exists at the premium end. And if they can be the ones that kind of enable that middle ground where there is actually a decent return coming from those live premium experiences through advertising related initiatives, it would be an absolute game changer. It's, as you said, rose tinted glasses. That's the blue sky. That's the holy grail if it works. And then YouTube will just win again. They will just basically be, hey, we can do this for them, and this is on the most premium set of content that exists. We can do it for anyone. If you can, if you've got live sports to share, they've got tools and initiatives and AI tools where they'll be able to drop their own ad breaks in throughout the whole experience or in an automated fashion. That's the holy grail. That's where it could get to. Whether it gets there, I'd be shocked if it got there after the first one, because there's no doubt a bit of a learning exercise. Now, remember, this is probably going to be one of the most concurrently watched,
live streamed,
live streaming events they've had on YouTube for some time. No idea to what scale. No idea how it's going to. Couldn't work out the numbers. But if you think about what Prime Video's been doing already in terms of some of their numbers. You're in the teens of millions happening, and that's behind the Prime paywall. You must be looking at some near records outside of what's happened in India. That's my guess. So they've got the tech challenge to resolve. If anyone can do it, they can. But they've also got this revenue gap or an opportunity that I'm really excited to see if they can fill the void.
Well, as someone that would love to personally see it, please everyone tune in to make it work so I can get more sports on YouTube. I would love that. But Nick, moving on to the next one, we saw the tip-off of the WNBA season. Our features editor, Sam Karp, is doing a series of content around the launch of the new WNBA season. So please do go check that out. I know he's putting a bunch of work into that. There's multiple pieces. I even saw our friends at Ampere Analysis shared over some information. But they have recently, as part of the NBA's media rights deal, the WNBA rights were packaged in to be a part of that. So my understanding is that those two deals there was a part that was carved out specifically going to the WNBA. Now, I think kind of the interesting question here, Nick, is there are some that would argue that has limited the value of the WNBA rights. Some might argue that being combined with the NBA has helped secure a higher rights because that's now sort of put into the same package deal. I think it's also interesting for people that don't know, if you don't, the NBA essentially sort of subsidizes and helps runs the WNBA. So it's not completely an independent league the way some others are. But, from your take, Nick, with the WNBA, do you think that relationship with the NBA has hindered or helped in their newest set of agreement rights?
Oh, it's a tricky one. I can see both sides of the coin, and there's always a lot of debate around this, and everyone will quickly tell you they should leave the WNBA to do their thing and negotiate their own deals. And I do get that, but I also think that the NBA can easily put a little bit of pressure on those major carriage partners and say, "Hey, just give us a little bit more." It doesn't have to be a lot more because the relative returns that WNBA can drive in isolation will be marginal. But on the scale of those NBA deals, they can squeeze an extra couple of percent out. That is a real needle mover still for what the WNBA can deliver from a revenue perspective from any of those media rights partners they'd be looking to do a deal with. So my gut feel is they wouldn't do it unless it was the right approach. The only hesitation I have of saying that is this the NBA trying to keep too much control on the WNBA and not letting it get letting it get in the way of perhaps of the NBA, because they can dictate to those ESPN types and those partners about the types of coverage and so forth they get. Because I imagine, looking at some of the data I've seen over the years, I don't have a lot of numbers to hand, but the WNBA has actually performed really well, particularly last year with Caitlin Clark joining the league with huge growth, and some of the meaningful games outdid the NBA in some instances, right? In terms of visibility and just ratings overall in those instances. Now, we have to put things in perspective, right? The NBA season, 82 game season plus playoffs, it's a massive slog. There's a lot of content going on. The WNBA season is much shorter, and the Caitlin Clark effect, will that continue for the years to come after the success they had last year? I think we've only just started the season, so we'll have to see how that plays out, but you'll definitely hear more of that along the way. So I think the NBA wouldn't get in the road, I think, unless they felt it worthwhile. I can't see why the NBA would basically let down the WNBA's growth because they were trying to hold on to control of basketball within the country. They're already competing with the NCAA as it is. It's a smaller competition. And relatively, the revenues that the WNBA are doing now are still really low-key in comparison to the NBA itself. So my conclusion is this is the best thing for them at the moment. They're able to negotiate a bit harder for the WNBA than the WNBA can do in isolation. But that's from outside in, and who knows what happens behind closed doors.
And to be clear, like, this represents a massive growth for the WNBA. They're going to be bringing in $200 million a year. From my understanding, that's a 250% increase from what they were previously doing. So it is a significant deal. And to your point, Nick, like, I think there will be a time the WNBA can probably go independent with these negotiations. But at this moment, given how much talk there was going into this set of NBA deal, how big it was going to be, sort of the last of the American deals that need to be signed, it was a great time to hop on that. But there is, hope moving forward. And, I'll, speak for myself, Nick, just my personal anecdotal story when I got on Twitter. it was completely blown up on Sunday morning talking about Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese. I think it's great to have a rivalry. Everyone loves a rivalry in sports. Tiger and Phil. MJ had it with the Detroit Pistons, and he had the multiple series against the Jazz. It's always great to have these rivalries in sports. So I do think it is interesting. Some of the data that came from Ampere Analysis, which I thought was interesting, is they were comparing some of the domestic fandom between sports, or like a willingness to pay between the WNBA with NASCAR and the NHL. And they're on par with those sports in terms of where that fandom is. I think one of the interesting points that Ampere put out, though, is those sports have been established for decades, and that despite the fact that fandom's on par, there's still a degree with which you kind of need that longer term proof of concept that it's going to work there. But there's lots of reasons to be optimistic with some of the young talent that's coming through, the growth of fandom. There is a moment to break free. And I'd also say, I think they showed the statistics. I think the next closest sports league is NWSL, and it's around 50 million. So it's 4 times bigger than the next domestic women's sports league in the world. Like, it's far and away the most popular, most lucrative domestic women's sports league in the world. So there are things to be positive about for them.
Oh, completely. And I just think you've got to reflect on what we think the future of sports and sports revenues and the business of sports looks like. And is media rights the holy grail for these sort of challenger sports that are coming through? Or can they drive real value by just building fandom through other channels? Does it have to be the media rights check that is the great savior for them, or the great growth mechanism? Because many will struggle to see that in a lot of other markets. US is a bit of an exception still to date, but if they can keep growing their influence and visibility on social, I had a similar experience going on my various social channels, and I kept seeing the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese story pop up everywhere. That exposure is driving fandom and interest in the sport, and will blow away a lot of the coverage I even saw around the NBA playoffs that are happening. They're right in the thick of like Game 7. And I don't know who won Game 7 last night, but I do know that there's a lot of coverage around Caitlin Clark and foul on Angel Reese, which I think is a bit redundant, but it got loads of coverage and people buying into it as a result of that. So it shows the power of personalities that get the headlines, and that you have to tell those stories around the game, and they have got really some good tailwind behind them and in growing fandom. And I think that can be a really significant growth and revenue driver for them, not just through media rights, perhaps in other means as well.
And for what it's worth, that was never a flagrant foul. I get basketball seems to be getting a softer sport these days, but like growing up watching the bad boy Pistons and things like that, I'm not saying we want people getting in fights and all that, but like that was about as soft of a flagrant foul as I can remember seeing.
And yet here we are. It's generated hundreds of millions of views across all their different channels. It doesn't take much, but as soon as there's a little bit of debate on topics, things can explode.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, moving, for our one story of the day that's going to move ourselves across the pond back over to the UK, is we saw a new deal between TNT and Premiership Rugby for a 5-year deal, coming at $200 million, so $40 million a year. And Nick, I think this is a bit important just from context, people. I don't think people understand how close Premiership Rugby was to potentially not surviving COVID. They had a couple teams that went under. Things were looking a bit rough. So to be able to come back and secure a deal of this magnitude, now granted, it kind of brings it back to the levels it was at pre-COVID, but I think that in context to understand sort of where it was going through after COVID, this is a big deal for them in terms of moving forward, momentum. I think some of the statistics our technology editor Steve McCaskill threw in there. They've seen 11% increased viewership year on year. It's up 24% if you look the year before that. It is something that's growing, and I think for the sport, it's a massive lifeline to be able to plan forward from what it sounds like so much for Premiership Rugby was trying to survive on a year-on-year basis. This now gives you a bit of a runway, and I think as well back to some of the money that CVC put into rugby before COVID, and I'm sure they're hoping that this will help a little bit of a return on investment on there. But for you, Nick, thinking about this, and perhaps it's not even just Premiership Rugby, it could be TNT, because I believe they're going to either put on their linear channels or stream every single rugby game, giving TNT more stuff, more content to attract subscribers. What are some of your key takeaways from this story, Nick?
Yeah, I think definitely would say anyone who's interested in what's going on in this, do follow Steve McCaskill. He's got his ear to the ground on what's happening on the rugby side. Also, he's a big rugby fan, but he's very attuned to this stuff, and he's written out a good little write-up about this. particular deal. Look, it's the deal that they needed. They needed to get a deal, had the growth, because quite frankly, every rugby league club, that's rugby union team since CVC's money came in has been in dire straits along the way, if not are in dire straits currently financially because of the way the money's been used and spent along the way. So this at least gives them a bit of a reprieve to know, okay, we've got a rosier outlook ahead of us from a financial perspective, given there's some growth here. I'd be curious to see how much competition there was coming from their other competitors in the market, because it is a pretty significant investment. Now, we're talking about all 93 games of the season live, made available on the platform. There's also the women's competition. They'll have at least one game on the platform. Feels that that's a bit of a throw-in little deal there, one game. But maybe that helps them get a little bit of extra exposure and allows the women's competition to still do its own deals along the way. I think it feels like they're giving a lot more way to get this growth, but that feels, as long as the exposure and visibility is there, then that's probably a win for them. I do think that rugby is one of these sports, particularly in the UK, that has a quite a defined demographic that follows it, an audience group, and that probably is more highly affluent than a typical football fan group, and therefore they are probably more likely to drive subscriptions to some of these platforms. So that's probably why it's been an ongoing long-term investment by TNT Sports and BT Sport when they came into market that I think has really paid off for them to be supporting and really targeting rugby. I think the opportunity for Premiership Rugby generally is massive still. They still could become the Premier League of rugby if they get things right, but the money they spent along the way has not bared those fruits, and now we're in this limbo place where no one really knows what the future holds for them. Is the future a Premier League, or is it more like a League One or League Two if you're going to compare it to the football competition? So I'm still, the jury's out there, but at least this gives them some financial surety and visibility to make sure that they continue to make sure they're delivering good exposure to the clubs as who are a part of the league.
One of the other interesting statistics that Steve included in here was that they saw a 40% increase in viewership when the rugby games followed a Premier League match. And I find this a bit interesting, Nick, in the sense I remember speaking to Melissa Walton once at Sale GP, and they were talking about their media deals. And she said, quite honestly, we're not necessarily looking at who we're competing against in the time slot. We're looking at who is either immediately in front of us or immediately after us. She sort of recognized that Sale GP is not necessarily going to be the top tier thing, but can we be on either side of a premier tier one thing to hope that someone might tune in 15 minutes early, or they might tune in an extra 15 minutes and you grab that extra bit of attention. And, it might just be from a Warner Brothers TNT perspective that, we just don't want people to leave the platform. We don't want them to turn off and switch to another channel. So I just be curious sort of your thoughts, Nick, whether these, not necessarily the tier one sports, keeping in mind who they might be scheduled around, not necessarily scheduled against.
Yeah, I think it's not being talked about enough these days about the art of scheduling and programming. And that was actually one of the great skills that many broadcasters had to have before we got to a D2C and on-demand world, where how do you schedule the content right? Just thinking about, you've got a finite amount of money available and you've got a finite amount of time available. How do you make sure you get the balance right to achieve the things that we're talking about here in terms of driving mass audience and keeping them on the platform as long as possible? And then you've got the rights holder side that you've just talked about. And how do you make sure you can ride the coattails of some of these more premium sports to get more visibility and maybe drive fandom longer term to your sport as well? So you get higher ratings and you can get long-term fans of your sport. It's a really interesting thing we don't hear as much about, but I think as we go and see more of the US channels bringing their linear offering to D2C, and indeed these other platforms like TNT Sports, and have more focusing on their linear proposition, that starts to play more of a role over again. So it's good to hear it being talked about, because it hasn't been something that we've discussed for probably ever, and is a real skill set that is probably not been as valued for the previous years in this new on-demand era.
Yeah, it is an interesting point, Nick. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting statistic. It just made me think of a conversation I had at one time, and something people probably maybe don't give enough time to think about. But the last story we're going to cover today, Nick, I included because I thought it was interesting. I'm glad to hear you also thought it was interesting as well. I don't necessarily know how big this current news story is going to be. I don't know how needle moving this particular thing is, but I'm really interested to see what it can mean in the future down the path. And what we're going to talk about is EA Sports, their FC mobile app is now going to be streaming MLS matches live. And I guess the reason I find this interesting is, I guess if you're in the space, it won't surprise you. If you're not, like EA's FC, which is no longer FIFA, we covered the story. I think it was a silly idea. Talking about what's in a name, Nick. FIFA probably should have been happy to make $30 million a year letting EA use their name. But the EA, video game franchise with football, soccer, depending on where you're at in the world, being able to live stream MLS matches from their app, I think is incredibly interesting given the crossover you're going to have with interest. Now, we've talked about the MLS and their approach with Apple. That was an exclusive global deal, but over the couple of years that they've started that, you've seen MLS kind of opening things up. I think they did some stuff with OneFootball as well. But I think this one's just particularly interesting because of the EA tie-in. And like I said, I don't know how big, the MLS is not the Premier League or La Liga or Champions League, but could this approach with EA becoming some type of streaming partner, I think is interesting, Nick, as to what it could lead to.
Well, I think if nothing more, it allows discoverability. So people are playing these games. We've known for a while, right? There are people who play FIFA, love the game, but are they going on and then watching and really buying into the leagues that exist in their countries or in the World Cup and so forth because of the game? And this is the first chance we've really seen that I can think of where we can see if they can really transfer gamers to consumers of the sport itself. I don't expect all of a sudden the people in the game to now go and watch hours through the game. It's a mobile game experience, right? So it's not a lean back one, but they will at least come across that. And then they're obviously, one of the things they are offering is within that is a month's free subscription to the Apple TV product, which will allow people access that way. So I think it's just another one of those things to aid discoverability. We've talked about it before where MLS is now, and Apple to some extent have now released the shackles a little bit to try and make sure they're visible in more places. And this feels like a really smart strategic move to maximize the huge audience and engagement a platform like EA Sports FC has. So it's a really great marketing initiative. I'd be surprised if the people watch a full game through a mobile game, and I'd be interested to see the technology component there of what that experience is really like. I probably have to go download the app actually and check it out and see what it looks like, because it sounds like it's a complicated proposition. We have seen other games try this. Remember, Fortnite's done a bunch of stuff with other sports, other live entertainment experiences. I can't think if they've done anything live sports wise about viewing within the game, but it's a very different type of environment to just what they're offering here, which is basically real estate in the EA Sports FC mobile app, where you click a link to their portal, their TV channel, and watch the game live there. So I'm not sure if it's something massive. I just like bridging those worlds together. I'd love to see if it can actually deliver the results thereafter. I'm just not sure it's going to be a huge needle mover for them. But I like this type of move. It's just a bit more innovative and could lead to some incremental wins.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it's ever going to be game changing, but just reminds me some of the stuff, thinking about what LiveScore would do with being able to do some of the streaming from a betting perspective, or, DraftKings trying to set up their own streaming channels, where, again, I don't think it's going to be the main people go to consume things. I think the rights holders wouldn't give away some massive exclusivity towards that, but it's just, like you said, incremental gains. And I think it's an interesting, even as you start thinking about these Web3 metaverses, I'm really going off piece now, Nick, but like you start, bringing more value to those experiences where they're not just so linear in their kind of experience.
I'm intrigued to see it. I believe it's only the mobile game, and I would like to have seen this deal encompass the, what do you call it? The console game as well, to see if they could bring that to life. If it's only mobile, then it is limiting their audience possibilities, just because from a watch time perspective as well. So, yeah, I'd like to see more of these types of things happen and see if they can actually move the needle. I think it's going to be trickier than they probably would want it to be to shift someone as a consumer of EA Sports to the MLS product. But hopefully it works for them.
Yeah, and we'll keep following it nonetheless. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of StreamTime Sports, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.